Hello and welcome to this episode of Own the Journey, where we get to meet with incredible people from around the world and share their wisdom with you. Today we get the pleasure of speaking with Max Buetow, the CEO of CoxHealth. Max, thanks for being with us today.
It's great to spend the time with you. Thank you.
And so for those that don't know much about your history and how you've landed at CoxHealth, tell us just a little bit about how you got here.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a non-conventional background for someone that's a healthcare executive, but I grew up in the construction industry.
Wow.
And so my family's business was flipping houses. That's something I always wanted to do in life. Unfortunately, when I came out of school and launched my career in construction, it was 07 through 09, so the Great Recession. And went about a period of 6 months at one point in time not getting paid, and my wife told me I needed to go get a real job. So I remember literally praying at the time and saying, Lord, where do you want me? And I said, I'll do anything, but I don't want to go into food manufacturing because my wife worked at Kraft and it just didn't appeal to me at the time. And so lo and behold, the job I got was making hot dog buns for Sara Lee in Wichita, Kansas.
No kidding.
And the odd thing about it is I fell in love with manufacturing. I loved it. And so thought that would be my career path until out of the blue, about 2 years later, I got a phone call from a guy who had done my MBA with a jury. And he was a vice president at CoxHealth. And he goes, I want you to come in and I want you to help us run a neurosurgical clinic. Wow. And I said, Brian, I make hot dog buns for a living. What do I know about healthcare? He goes, well, you love people and you love process. We can figure out the rest.
Yeah.
So that's kind of my journey into healthcare.
That's amazing. And so how has that knowing process and believing in it so much, how has that translated into what you do now?
Yeah, and I think in any industry that you work in, most oftentimes your prized product are your people.
Yeah.
And so I always focus on the people first, and I say I try to be a people expert because I'm not a subject matter expert by any means. And so, but I think if you have great people and then you put really good processes around those people, those great people can do great things. And so no different than working and making hot dog buns to now helping deliver care to people in our community. I think that focus on people and process is a mainstay.
I love that. And I think one of the incredible things that you have done at Cox is to bring in the culture or enhance the culture that was already there, really lean into what the foundations that were there and continue to rise that up. Tell us just a little bit about your philosophy and how you talk about culture within the organization.
I think what's really neat about the cultures, we've been inheriting a positive culture for decades upon decades. It's probably the strength of our organization is that we've had this, what we call family culture that dates back to Lester E. Cox. And so if you look at the generations of leaders in this organization, and I was passed the baton by probably one of the best of them, Steve Edwards, there was always this emphasis on no matter how big we get, we're still a family. And I think that's one of the things we emphasize over and over again with our people, or we're a family. Doesn't mean family's perfect by any means, but at the same time, we get to know each other at an intimate level. And what I tell our teams is, I want you to be able to trust me at my core. I want you to be able to trust those things that are implicit to me as a leader, even though my execution may be wrong. So you need to trust the intentions even when the execution goes awry a little bit. And so on the first day when our employees come into orientation, we onboard about 50 to 100 people a week.
Wow.
I say, I'm going to put some equity in the bank with you right now. There's going to be a point in time where you look at me as the CEO and go, what was that bonehead thinking? That was a bad decision because I'm not perfect either. But you need to be able to look at me also and say, but I understand where he was coming from and I trust where he was going.
I love that. And how do people receive that in the organization? How does that reciprocate throughout, sideways, up and down?
Sure. I think it sets the stage because we don't ask people to be perfect in healthcare. Even though the outcomes we produce are really important, we can't ask a nurse to get it right every single time. So they have to understand there's grace in our organization. There's times where we wrap each other up in a big hug and we say, you know what, let's just learn from the mistake. I'm a big fan of failing forward and failing quickly. And I also say, if we're not failing at times, we're probably not pushing things hard enough. If you don't generate enough ideas, then you won't probably have a bad idea every once in a while. So sometimes we just have to celebrate the bad ideas.
I love that. And try, fail, learn from it, move on, and then celebrate that sometimes as an organization so that you can use those experiences to make better choices in the future.
Yeah, that stopping to celebrate, I think, is oftentimes overlooked because you're so excited about the next thing that comes up. But until you celebrate that finish line, I don't know many runners that just run for the sake of running. They're typically running to hit a finish line. And you want to be able to celebrate at the end of that finish line. So I think it's important for us as an organization, as we hit those milestones, we take a pause, even if for a brief moment, and we say, hey, let's give ourselves a pat on the back and a high five, and then let's set our sights on the next thing.
Oh, that's so good. And one of the things that you shared with me in the past is how many people actually come back to the organization who have left. Tell us just a little bit about that. I love that story.
Yeah, the two things I enjoy most when I'm talking to our employees at orientations, I'll ask a couple of questions. One would be, is there anyone here that's here for the second time? And when I ask that question, you usually have between half dozen and a dozen people's hands that'll go up. And when I ask it, I say, well, why is that the case? Why have you come back? And they said, well, I miss the people I work around. I miss my work family. And so I think that's wonderful.
Yeah.
I think the other piece that I really enjoy is when someone raises their hand when I ask the question, does anyone's family member work here? And I think there's no better positive feeling when someone says, my dad or my mom have worked here for 25 years and their experience has been so good that I wanted to come here too.
What a gift.
Yeah, I think to myself, they're sitting around the table at dinner for 25 years and they're talking about how their day went. And if they're ragging on the organization every single day, do you think the daughter, the son, the husband, the wife is going to come work at your organization? Probably not.
No way.
So I think 25 years, they're probably saying some pretty good things about working at CoxHealth.
That's pretty amazing. And so what are you doing new into your role? So you're a young guy, you're thrust into this massive amount of responsibility. How are you surrounding yourself with amazing people? I know that that's something that you really believe in. You don't claim to know everything in the world, but right. you want to put the right people around you. So talk to us just a little bit about that.
I think that's probably the greatest gift. When I was approached by Steve Edwards and said, I'd like you to consider taking on this role as being a CEO and at least go through the process, I was terrified by the prospect of having to follow in Steve's footsteps. Actually, I was the guy that was saying for years, I feel sorry for the poor sucker that's got to come behind Steve Edwards because he's just so good.
Yeah.
He was an iconic leader in our organization, and he had everything I wanted to be as a leader. And so I understand there would be a significant gap between if I were to come into this role and where Steve was going to be, and I knew I couldn't fulfill that by myself. And so the cool thing is the culture of the organization is I didn't have to fill that gap by myself. And so it was the rallying around me of everyone else, and we've collectively worked together to fill that gap. And honestly, there's more strength in numbers than there is in one individual.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So that's probably my greatest gift as a leader, is knowing that I'm not the best at anything, but I will surround myself with the best people.
Oh, that's amazing. And a part of that strategy, or part of that process, you launched a new strategy, and you went from many things and trying to simplify that a little bit inside the organization as well.
Yeah, and so that's one of the really cool things that we learned through COVID, is that if we can get a very narrow focus and we can align everyone behind that narrow focus, you can do incredible things. So the example I give is, we stood a 52-bed ICU up in 2 weeks. And so that's an intensive care unit. So this is the sickest of the sick patients, and we created an environment where they could receive care in just under 2 weeks. If you would have asked us outside of the pandemic how long it would have taken, we'd have said 2 years. But again, we had one limited focus as an organization. That was caring for our community in the dire straits of what happened around COVID. And so we knew if we just focused on it well enough, we could get to that. And so now that's the paradigm and the concept we're bringing into now our new age. And we're saying to ourselves, okay, we may not be able to focus on one thing and one thing only, but if we can narrow that lens to 5 or 6 key things, we can bring those through the finish line, celebrate the heck out of them when we get there, and then move on to the next. I think people get addicted to that success and the momentum because people want to see those wins.
Yeah, absolutely. Addicted to the success. I love that a lot. Yeah. So how's that played out throughout the organization? I mean, oftentimes in an organization, I think you said 13,000 people that you guys have in the family, and so when you are trying to share a strategy with that many people, oftentimes it gets lost to certain parts of the organization. But when you've narrowed the focus, how has that changed it? Yeah,
I think it's helpful because at the same time, people have great ideas that are bubbling up from the surface all the time. And so we want to be able to say, that's a great idea, but maybe not right now. And I think as you show that you're willing and committed to getting things through those finish line, people can say, it may not be my time to run my horse, but when my time comes, boy, we're going to put a lot of emphasis behind them and get through the finish line. I think the challenge in a we'll say a mid-sized to large organization is making sure people feel bought in. And initially, as we started communicating our strategy, we were very technical in that communication. And we found as we were then going out and having conversations with the front line, it just wasn't connecting, it wasn't jiving. And so we took a step back, and what we heard from our employees is we want to be connected to the mission of the organization and help us understand how our strategy is going to help us fulfill the mission. And so in doing that, we crafted an ambition statement. We started sharing with our employees really the ambition statement of who we want to be in 5 years, and then we weave in some of those tactical components from our strategy into that and connecting it to the ambition statement. And so we found that that's helping out a little bit.
Yeah, and you not only have just one hospital that you're managing at CoxHealth, but you have multiple clinics around a large region that you have to communicate that to and get them bought into that as well.
We do. We're actually a system with 6 different hospitals in it that are in a 26 county service area. And we've got over 80 clinics that are out there. We have 550 physicians and 13,000 employees. And so not only do you have a wide expanse of a geography trying to communicate across, you're also looking at everything from a physician to someone that's working in environmental services. And that message is taken differently and means different things to different people.
Absolutely.
And so that's an exciting opportunity for us too. And I think communication is oftentimes the rise or the downfall of any organization.
Absolutely. And you guys have put a massive amount of energy into that, and it seems to be really grabbing hold, because one of the experiences that I know that you're really leaning into as a part of the strategy, but also kind of the tactical pieces that you shared with me, was that you do today, and always have done a great job in delivering healthcare, but some of the billing experiences weren't always awesome. And so you're even taking a look at how you can make that experience a positive thing in a tough time.
It is. So as we look at, we've always talked about our patient, and our patient is really dear and important to us, but not every time someone is interacting with us in the world of healthcare are they our patient. Sometimes they're just our customer. And what's really interesting is customer demand is being shaped and shifted, not by what's happening at CoxHealth or Mercy or what even happened globally across the country in healthcare. It's being forged by J-Marks and Amazons and organizations that are doing that customer service piece extremely well. So if healthcare is going to continue to survive and thrive and meet the customer needs and demands, we have to look at ourselves not just as healthcare institutions, but across the board, how do we become customer-centric institutions?
Wow.
And so there's a shift there and a mentality that says we want to be able to focus on our patient, we're going to keep them near and dear to us, but at the same time, how do we help create technological solutions and process-driven solutions and people-driven solutions to meet their customer needs?
Yeah, I love that a whole lot, because I think it's one of the stressful components after the healthcare experience is how am I going to deal with this? And so when you've got an empathetic team that is focused on good customer service, it can really make a huge difference in people's lives. That's fantastic. You mentioned technology. Obviously, I'm a self-proclaimed geek. I love to see how things are going to shift and what's going on. But in healthcare, I mean, it's moving and shifting probably faster than it ever has. How are you guys handling that? What are you doing inside the organization, and what do you see coming?
Yeah, I think people are surprised to hear this statistic, and it's one that was recently shared with me. Typically, when an organization outside of healthcare implements a new technology, they see an improvement in their productivity. We actually see a decline to the tune of 13% as we implement new technologies. And it's oftentimes because technology that we're implementing is being foisted on us by regulatory environment factors.
That makes sense.
And so it's more button clicks, in which if you're talking to a doctor or nurse, the enemy of the doctor or nurse is the click, right? And so we're trying to figure out how to reduce clicks. For the first time in my career, though, I'm seeing some really cool things on the horizon in terms of technology to reverse that trend. And AI is a big piece of that. And AI is not just going to affect our internal customer, it's going to affect our external customer as well. I think ChatGPT is going to be really exciting to see what kind of things we can deliver to our consumer in terms of just information that helps guide them through a very difficult process to navigate at times. Wow. So that's one of those components. But also that artificial intelligence to be able to allow the physician and the patient to reconnect and not sit behind a keyboard. I participated in a demo the other day where someone sat and recorded a conversation, and almost like in Siri fashion, there's a dictation device that's happening in the background and asking questions. And I'll tell you, I tried to lead this thing on all sorts of crazy squirrel trails all along the way. Didn't capture any of that. And I looked at the note at the end of that conversation, and it was pristine.
Really?
And so that's exciting for our physicians, because then they can sit across the room and they can actually connect with their patient again, which is what they want to do instead of a computer screen.
Wow, that's absolutely amazing for what's coming. So what do you see? I mean, we know one of the big challenges in all industries, but particularly in healthcare, is we don't have enough workers to go around. We don't have enough providers. How do you see that kind of coming together or complementing what it means to be able to deliver good healthcare, use technology right, and maybe help that problem a little?
Yeah, I think where we see opportunities in technology, and I'll give an example. So we're one of the leading organizations across the country of implementing a virtual nursing program. And what that means is we have nurses that are at a point in their career, they want to be in their feet for 12 hours a day. But they've got all this institutional knowledge that can help us kind of piggyback what's happening at the bedside. So we've got these nurses that are sitting in a bunker now, monitoring up to 12 patients, and they're really really there to assist the nurse that's at the bedside, that the nurse at the bedside can really do the hands-on care, and a lot of that work that goes on behind the scenes, making sure documentation is right, and that orders go in a timely fashion, and discharge information happens timely, can happen by someone that's assisting them. There was a little bit of resistance in the front end from these nurses that had been doing nursing care the same way for the last 30 years.
Sure.
But boy, they got a taste of it, and we have so many of these testimonials now to say, this is the future of healthcare. So that technology fusion with our human capital is really exciting.
Yeah, that's absolutely amazing. So when you think about all these crazy things that are going on in healthcare and what it means to lead change in doing all of these things, you as an individual, have you dealt with the imposter syndrome? Young guy coming from, you mentioned, coming from making hot dog buns. I mean, how does that impact you individually, or is it just a confidence that you've got the right people?
Yeah, so you have to grow into that confidence a little bit, and I think the most beautiful moment is, for me, I won't say for everyone, but for me, that first 6 months is tough.
Yeah.
Because you're challenging yourself to say, am I really the right person for this role? And I think there's a positive side of that too. That self-reflection is good. But the aha moment for me was when I did understand that I didn't have to do this on my own. And that honestly, not trying to be a subject matter expert, not trying to get into the weedy components of everyone else's job, and leading a very high level, doing what I do best, which is setting the vision and strategy of the organization, and then hiring really great people to help fill in the gaps of how we go from point A to point B, made it successful. And so that's honestly the thing. When I roll out of bed and my feet hit the floor in the morning, no matter what the challenges of the day look like, I think about the people I get to work around and the opportunities to face some of these challenges together. That's exciting. And so I think that imposter syndrome starts to melt away if you understand what your role is, what lane you're supposed to go in, and know that you don't have to be everything to everyone.
That's amazing. Know your lane, and your lane is obviously people and process. I mean, you just love people. I've known that about you since we met, and it kind of glows throughout what it means to work with you. And the feedback from your team, by the way, has been just extraordinary since you've been coming into the organization and making a difference.
Well, we pay them to say that, so that's good.
Well, that's good. Well, in addition to everything else that you have going on, you spend a reasonable amount of time contributing to the community as well, and balancing that. I know that there's a couple of different things. You're involved with the chamber, you're involved with some credit unions, and your volunteer leadership in our community is also a big thing. How do you balance 13,000 employees and 80 locations and all of these things and still find time to do it?
Yeah, my mom taught me growing up, you always make time for what's most important. And so in my life, my faith is the most important thing to me. So I spend a lot of time at our church and volunteer at our church. My wife and I have the 9-month-old baby class on a weekly basis, and we get a chance to go in there, and it keeps us from having a 5th kid because she gets her baby fix out of the way. But at the same time, you get a chance to serve your community in a way that people are allowed to connect to their faith because they've got that few minutes away from a crying baby. And I think the community connection is one of the things I love most about Springfield. And I think I've been the recipient of people that have put their arms around me in the community and helped me kind of grow within that. And I think that reciprocal way that you can continue to invest in the community is a big deal. And so I've been able to sit on Multiply Credit Union, which is a credit union for our organization. And I think it's also a great chance to make connections with people in the community in a meaningful way. I'm not a networker. I'm not the guy that can go into a room of 50 people and work the room. I love these intimate conversations when we go out and have lunch. And I think when you get to serve in the community on boards, when you get to serve in ways that you're working alongside other people in a meaningful way, and where you see that kind of co-passion ignited, you can really make good connections. And I think that's one of those things. I get more out of serving the community than the community gets me serving.
Oh, that's so good. I love your heart for that. Thanks for doing it. And I think one of the other interesting things that I want to talk about as it relates to serving the community in a larger way is we have 2 major health systems in Springfield, and I was surprised to hear how you all work together. Would you mind to share just a little bit about how some might think of it as competition, but that's not how you see it?
Yeah, I would agree. I think we're richly blessed as a community to have 2 top-tier organizations here, and I think what's great about that is I do think competition breeds improvement. And so in many ways, CoxHealth and Mercy will continue to be fiercely competitive because in that competition, we say, David Argetta and I at Mercy, I say, David, I want you to do great things, but I just want to do them with a plus at CoxHealth, which makes this kind of constant leapfrog motion. And what happens is the community is the beneficiary of those advances. But there are certain select areas it doesn't make sense for us to compete. It only makes sense for us to come together to better serve the community. And so when you have 2 like-minded organizations that are missionally led, it only really bears itself out if you can come together at the table in a meaningful way and say, how do we address the needs of the community together better than we can individually? And so that's been fun to do that. I'll tell you again, I think the guy that's over sitting in my chair at Mercy right now is someone I respect and revere. And the reason for that is because I think he's got one of the kindest hearts I've ever met.
That's amazing.
And it all catalyzed on, I got a phone call from him after he'd been in town for 2 weeks. We had a dear friend, a family member of ours within our organization that passed away. He left me a phone message and he said, I just want to let you know I'm so sorry to hear about the passing of David Strong. And that was how we started the relationship, which is kind of a humble communication that came from him as an olive branch, and it's grown ever since.
And you guys get together on a regular basis now.
We do. We try to at least once a month get together, but more often than that as of late, because we're trying to dream and scheme up some really good things for this community right now.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. I think the lesson there, even for small businesses, is when you're more focused on serving than you are on competing or winning, selfishly, and you can come together with your competitors to get a great outcome for those that you serve, and ultimately that creates a better experience for everyone involved. And you can define your lanes. Right. So there's areas where you can become more of the specialist, and Mercy can become more of the specialist and own your lane.
It is, and it really ends up being, where is your focus? Is it internal or is it external? Is it on you, is it on others? And I think in healthcare, if our focus isn't on others, we're in the wrong spot.
Yeah, I love it a lot. Well, Max, so as we get ready to wrap up today, one of my favorite questions to ask people is what's some of the best advice that you've ever received?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I've gotten a lot of great advice in my life. I'll tell you, this is one more recently I got from my sister-in-law. Mm-hmm. My brother was contemplating for my sister-in-law and brother-in-law to go serve in a missional capacity over in Syria. Mm-hmm. And I said, oh my goodness, that scares me to death. Aren't you nervous? They just had a kid, 3-month-old at the time. And I said, this seems like a bad decision. And she said, well, you know what? There's no better place to be in your journey through life in the middle of God's will. And so for me, as of late, that's what I've been focusing on. As I look at back in hindsight at my journey over the course of time, I had a lot of plans for my life. None of those have worked out exactly how I thought they would be, but now as I look back, I think to myself, there's been no better place for me to be than in the middle of God's will.
That's such good advice. Well, Max, thanks for taking the time to share with us this morning, and congratulations.
Thank you.
Even though you're not a drinker, I'll tip a glass to you and say congrats on owning your journey.
Same to you. Thank you.